The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're listening to Inspire FM. This is Friday Night Live. It's 6 o'clock on Friday. It must be Friday Night Live. You're listening to Inspire FM, 105.1 FM. And we're going to talk about topical issues as we normally do. My name is Zaffar Iqbal. With me in the studio is Abu Bakr Cooper, who's going to be co-hosting with me, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam, alhamdulillah. Like every week, we have a packed show, inshallah, 2 hours of discussions around topical issues that are pertinent to our community. Hopefully, inshallah, you all the listeners will be staying with me for the next couple of hours and listen in and contribute if you can, inshallah. If you want to contribute, inshallah, there's obviously, we have a number of different ways you can contribute to our discussions. Obviously, you can ring in and talk to us and our listeners. Our number is 01582481822. But obviously, there's other social media communication channels which are open to you too if you wanted to get in touch with us. Namely, WhatsApp. If you want to WhatsApp us, our number is 07779481822, or you can text me if you want to get involved in any of the items of discussion which I'm about to reveal to you for this evening. We're going to talk about Brexit. Now, that big deadline, 31st of October, is nearing. Is it going to be a Brexit date or not? What say ye, Abu Bakr?
Well, it's impossible.
It's impossible.
It's impossible.
Impossible, you say. All right. Or we'll have a couple of experts from different universities who's going to give us a view on that.
Well, it's not because it hasn't been improved. It has been agreed upon in principle. But what they have to do now is go through the process of reading it and the fine details before it can then be passed into the next stage to the House of Lords, and then it comes back from the House of Lords to get its rubber stamp. So what Prime Minister Johnson was hoping to do was do all of that reading process, start to finish, in 3 days, and have it sent to the Lords and then straight back, and then it would go straight on the statute books.
So me thinks he's trying to push through things that he doesn't want a lot of people to see or read through. I guess it's a fairly meaty document, right? That's this.
Well, it is a very meaty document. I mean, it's something that runs into hundreds of pages. Effectively, what we've got isn't massively different to what Theresa May had. So it's going to. So an awful lot of it is going to be very, very similar. It's just, of course, our representatives, our MPs, need to make sure that things are correct.
Nothing's been slid in there, right? Which wasn't intended to be slid in there.
well, I wouldn't say that, but that's for you to decide or say. But
right.
But no, I mean, having a law of this extent, taking some time to be read and discussed is a normal thing. It's actually the process that Prime Minister Johnson wanted to do it at a very fast track pace, which isn't the usual thing. So it's not, and the MPs have voted on it and they have approved it. But the fine detail, where they go through each clause and amendment, that is what has to be.
So that's the headline, inshallah.
Gone through.
So we'll have a couple of experts who can talk about the consequences and the timelines and what that means for the rest of the country, inshallah, shortly. We're also going to be talking about the Kashmir March, which is planned for tomorrow, and highlighting basically the plight of Kashmiris who have been under siege effectively for almost 2 months, almost 3 months now, almost. So we'll have some people who are going to talk about what activities are being happening to highlight their plight effectively. We're also going to talk about Prevent again, again in our show, and we're going to talk about the review of Prevent itself, which took place, and whether that was a fair process in doing that or not. I think there are some people who disagree, say that wasn't a fair process, and we're going to give them an opportunity to try and put the case forward. And finally, we're going to finish off with a topic which is very, very important, I guess, to the whole community. In the times that we're living in, we're going to talk about mental health. And we're talking about mental health among Muslims. There are some disturbing stats which have been released which seem to indicate that mental illness is quite prevalent within our community. So we're going to be talking about that around about 7:30, inshallah, so stay tuned. Some really, really important topics. I'm hoping that you will join me on this journey, couple of hours and journey, and keep me amused, and then I can keep you amused, inshallah. Join me if you can, ring me if you can, and participate in our discussion. So we're going to have a discussion among ourselves while we're trying to get hold of our expert guests for the moment. So Brother Abu Bakr Cooper, who's with me, and he was talking about the fact that, in essence, the law or the agreement has been approved, which is a bit odd, really, isn't it? Why, if it's approved, why the shenanigans? Just get on with it.
Well,
the
shenanigans isn't just on the situation, as it were. It isn't just sitting with the rest of the House of Commons. Because of this issue not being backed to be fast-tracked through, Mr. Johnson himself has actually paused the progression of the bill, which, as it's the government's bill, is his right to do. So although the MPs have said yes, effectively, my understanding is that's in principle, but now because he's now upset about it, he's sort of got to have the last.
That's what I mean. It's shenanigans, isn't it?
He has to have the last word. So he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to pause the bill."
But if you think about it, the bill has been put back a little bit because the MPs want more details to comb through it, I guess, right, with more details and then read the details, etc. But isn't it a bit back to front? They've actually approved it and then they want to look at it. Don't they actually look at it in detail first and then have a vote on it? Isn't that back to front?
Well, it does seem odd, but it is normal for things to be read over and have each fine detail. But I have to say that I don't fully understand myself why it is that they couldn't approve it in principle, because, like I said, every MP is aware pretty much of of the details, because it's not every single thing that Mrs. May had that it's been changed. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's
just the Northern Ireland bit by the looks of things, isn't it?
It's fine nuances that have been changed. So it shouldn't be a massive amount of reading, especially for someone that is used to reading things and how they're written in law, to pick up the differences between what was there before that they didn't like and what is there, which in essence, you see, they have approved, but they've said that. What they've rejected but you see, it is normal to have a drawn out consideration of a piece of legislation. To fast track it through, that isn't normal. So to do that is what Prime Minister Johnson was trying to do. But now he's said, because he obviously come hell or high water, die in a ditch.
31st of October, I'm leaving.
So he doesn't die in a ditch. He's got to have the last word, and he said that he's pausing the progression of the bill. So
until they approve elections.
Yeah.
He's holding.
And of course, what the opposition will not do is to approve an election, and unless there's a cast iron absolute guarantee that a no deal Brexit is never going to happen. and of course the government won't agree to that either. So
right, okay,
we are in this crazy paradoxical situation of watching all this going on, and the country is not being governed.
Indeed. We've got Dr. Alan Wager on the line. He's a research associate at the UK in Changing Europe initiative at King's College in London. Welcome, Dr. Alan.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Not bad, thank you very much once again for joining us at Inspire FM. You always bring light to our discussions.
Yeah.
We've kicked off with basically critiquing the fact that a bill has been passed, but without looking at the details, a bit back to front, I would have thought. What's your view on that?
Well, a bill has passed in theory. It's passed second reading on the back of Labour MPs saying, okay, we'll look at this bill, but we might want to add new elements to it. So. I think we'll have a situation where, while there's a majority in theory for Brexit happening, there's no majority for any exact type of Brexit, and that's what we've seen over the last 3 years. MPs understand that a lot of the public want to, to call it a phrase, get Brexit done, but each individual type of Brexit, if it's something that people in the Conservative Party support, then people in the Labour Party don't like it, and if it's something that gets Labour MPs on board, then Conservative MPs don't like it. And that's what we're going to see probably if the bill does end up being debated at the next stage in the House of Commons. That's what we're going to see. The tensions in the number of those that voted for the deal in theory come out in the open.
So actually, do you mind actually sort of unpicking what happened on Tuesday? Because I think that when I was reading through the headlines in the newspapers, they focused on the second part, which was the government's defeat. But then there's some information came through about the fact that the government had actually pushed through the bill. So a little bit confused what happened in the sequence of events, and if you can unpick through them and see.
So the first vote, which the government won by 30 votes, was on the principle of Boris Johnson's deal, the main parts of the deal, this new deal for Northern Ireland, the money that the UK owes to the European Union, and citizens' rights and so on. That was passed by 30 votes. The idea that we should have a bill that enacts Brexit. But then the next vote, which was lost by the government, was on the timetable, and that said that we'll only give you a few days to vote through this. And the reason that speaks to the reason why I just say so. There's a majority in theory, but MPs want to put amendments to it and want to change the bill, and that's why they weren't willing to let it just be pushed through in that amount of time. Right.
Okay. And what's happened now? I think since then it's actually been paused. The government said, well, actually no. Well, we're not going to let you have that bill until we're happy in that you've agreed on a election date or something. Is that?
Yeah, so the government are essentially now using this bill as a sort of bargaining chip and saying, if you give us an election, we'll drop this bill. And that's where, I mean, it shows that ultimately whether or not Brexit happens or not before an election is the main thing for the government. Not whether or not it gets done in the best way possible, really. It's part of the politics of the present moment and of trying to get that majority for the Conservative Party after the next election. And they think that if they can force an election as soon as possible, they're clearly of the view that they'll win a majority in that election.
So in essence, what's happening really is just basically political manoeuvring to position the parties themselves in a position where they can gain the most public, appreciation before the run of the elections. That's what this is all about, isn't it? It's not all about agreements anymore. It's not about European agreement anymore. It's more about, right, okay, we want to end up top. We want to be the ones who have said, right, we got it through, that type of thing. Is that fair reading?
Yeah, politicians are doing politics, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just a question of whether or not it's clear now we're in a situation where Boris Johnson says he's got a majority for Brexit in the House of Commons. He said he achieved a great big victory on Tuesday. Yet he also is saying that Parliament's stopping Brexit and we need to have an election. And on the other hand, you've got Labour saying we really, really want an election. And then when it comes to it, they vote against it. So you get the situation where what politicians are saying in public is actually different to the strategy that's going behind the scenes to try and get that outcome that they want. It's clear that the Labour Party thinks that right now is not the best time for an election.
And what's happening to the 31st of October then? I mean, up until I guess a couple of days ago, I guess the politicians were saying it's happening on the 31st of October, and yet today I think Sajid Javid has come out saying it's not going to happen. So what's the feeling?
And so some people in Westminster are saying actually all this discussion of an election and stuff is sort of hot air to sort of disguise the fact that the Boris Johnson's pledge that he would do or die leave on the 31st of October isn't going to happen anymore, and there's no chance of it happening now because MPs aren't going to let that happen now. So maybe so this was a lot of people expect, or at least expected, that Boris Johnson too would electorally and politically suffer if he lost and failed that deadline, and you'd start seeing Nigel Farage trying to gain political advantage by the fact that Boris Johnson failed to meet that deadline. But so far, Boris Johnson has effectively been very good at blaming everyone else for failing to meet this deadline.
Right. Okay. So I guess all of these manoeuvrings is more towards personalities and being seen in the public as being the one who's delivered, rather than actually getting the country on a proper footing. So I think it's interesting you mentioned the fact that I think majority of the MPs now want to leave. So that wasn't the position before, I guess, and that's changed recently, is it, or what's your view on that?
Yeah, well, what you've seen is a minority of Labour MPs who have always said that they want to vote for a Brexit, but never voted for any of Theresa May's deals. But now, so 19 Labour MPs voted for the second reading, and about half of those seem intent on voting for it all the way through. So. Right. A majority, and now that all of the Conservative Party are willing to vote for Boris Johnson's Brexit, it looks like there is the possibility of a majority in the House of Commons to pass through Brexit. And if he does succeed in doing that, then it will be a huge political success for Boris Johnson.
Indeed.
Which makes it a bit of a mystery as to why he's not pushing through this bill now and why he's going for an election instead. He must be looking at some really positive private polling that no one else can see at the moment, because it makes sense for him really to go and pass that bill and then go for the election. So
indeed, and I guess what Labour want is they want a bill and not have to sort of vote on it until the public has had a vote on it. So they want an election, but an election.
In fairness, what the opposition has said, not just Labour, is that. Yes, you can have an election, but you must agree that we will never have a no-deal Brexit. And that as an agreement, as guaranteeing a no-deal Brexit will not happen. See, that hasn't come from the other side either. See, so it's not a situation where it's just in the government or in the opposition. The government wants one thing, the opposition says, right, you can have it, and they have consistently said then take no deal off the table. But that's not been given as a guarantee.
If you got there's a deal, the MPs have voted on the deal. The European Parliament or European Union said they're happy with the deal. So what there is a deal. There's no deal on the table anymore, is there? In effect.
Sorry, there's what?
Well, personally, I think no deal is pretty unlikely now that Boris said that he prefers his deal. So,
he's paused the legislation. So he's actually effectively, locked the lockable chest.
I think it's more.
It's literally in the safe, isn't it?
So does that mean if that's the case? Does that mean there's some talk about the split in the party from those who want a no deal versus those who say, right, okay, we'll go for a deal. Is there such a split, or is everybody behind now, Boris, in terms of this deal?
In terms of the general public?
No, in terms of the politicians I'm talking about, in the Conservative Party.
In the Conservative Party, every single MP voted for both the deal in principle and the really fast timetable to pass it through.
Wow.
So the Conservative Party, all 278 of them voted for Boris Johnson. And that's partly because he kicked out 21 of them that didn't vote for it. So they weren't in favour of his version of Brexit and in favour of a no deal. So he's made his job easier a bit by getting rid of everyone that disagrees with him, but also he's got a remarkably united public party behind him. Both MPs but also people that are, conservative members, the people that voted him in. They overwhelmingly love what he's doing on Brexit, and all the people that like no deal seem to like Boris Johnson's deal, and all the people that wanted the deal seem to be happy with Boris Johnson's deal as well. So he's got a big united front behind him in the Conservative Party.
So I think no deal is unlikely in that case, in that particular scenario. So I guess in terms of the finer details, in terms of what's changed from Theresa May's time, and I guess that's all around Northern Ireland, is it? The question of Northern Ireland. What's the detail on that then? It looks like the DUP is quite upset with the deal. So it does seem like he's created something, right, which perhaps the Northern Irish people wouldn't like or don't like.
Yeah. So the agreement, as it is, means that there is going to be a border in the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. So if you're a business in Northern Ireland that wants to send over something to the rest of the UK, you'll have to fill out forms and declarations and so on. It's almost as if you're members of the European Union, not members of the United Kingdom.
Right.
And given that a lot of people in Northern Ireland are either feel very strongly British or very strongly Irish. The people that feel very strongly British, the DUP, are really unhappy about the way this has gone and the way this is going. Because in the future, if there's going to be a trade deal between the UK and America, for example, the Northern Ireland would be in the regulatory area of Europe.
Right.
And it wouldn't be part of that trade deal. So over time, you'd have a border that got thicker and thicker, and the differences between Northern Ireland, which would stay in Europe for all these things, and the UK, which would be making deals with other countries and become a different sort of economy, would get wider and wider over time. So people in the DUP think this is the first stage towards Ireland becoming one country again, Northern Ireland becoming one country.
And I think Sinn Féin, one of the Sinn Féin MPs, I think, added salt to the wound, saying that he doesn't see it's not far off when it'll be a united Ireland, and I think that's kind of rubbing salt into it, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, Sinn Féin came out and basically backed Boris Johnson's deal, which meant that there's basically 0% chance of the DUP being persuaded it's a good idea. So we've got a situation where every single MP that sits in the House of Commons, the Sinn Féin MPs don't sit in the House of Commons because they don't see it as a valid parliament, because they believe in United Ireland. All the Northern Ireland MPs are in the debate, really don't like this deal, but Boris Johnson thinks he can manage without them, I think, basically. That's the big strategic decision that's been made.
Brilliant. Okay.
So they don't really deserve to be called the Conservative and Unionist Party, do they?
Anymore.
Well, that's it.
Drop the pretense of the suffix unionist. Really, right. That's what they need to do. Really.
Right. Okay. Dr. Alan Wager, thank you very much for your contribution today. It's been
thanks for having me.
As usual, it's been fascinating. Thank you indeed. Goodbye. Right. Okay. Now then. Right. A Brexit. So what's going to happen next then, Abu Bakr? What's happening next in Brexit? Is it going to be election, or is it going to be?
Well, we were supposed to be out. I forget what the date was, in March now. And,
yeah.
And here we are, 6 months on, and we're still no further. I suspect that if the political elite, and I say in inverted commas, because none of them seem to be able to do what needs to be done for the country. If they can't get their act together, I think, because Europe needs to move on, and they're going to lose. I believe eventually they're going to lose patience. It only takes one of the countries out of the 27 remaining to say that they.
Yeah. So what Dr. Allen didn't.
Well, the situation is that if they decide to not renew anything and renew our membership, the legal position is we automatically come out without a deal. That is the reality, and this situation, and it's a festering canker sore going on and on and on. Europe Europe needs clarity, and I think eventually they will say enough is enough, and that they will just not grant an extension. That's it, and by default, the clock will tick, and we will just fall out.
Well, and I wonder if Boris is waiting for that. I wonder if Boris is saying, come on, you just kick us out, and we'll go out with a no deal. But again, I think in previous discussions we've had, there's no such thing as a no deal, because you still have to go.
No, but there isn't. We are out already because that has been signed unless an extension is granted. And this is the thing, because of our constant dithering, their patience will wear thin, and will they then say that they will not extend our time of membership? Right.
Okay. Time to move on to our next next item of discussion. We'll do that after the break, inshallah. So stay tuned. Come back to us again in a few minutes. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz. Listen to Inspire FM shows in your time by heading over to inspirefm.org or listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. You're listening to Inspire FM 105.1 FM. Before the break, we were talking about Brexit. I hope you enjoyed that discussion. It was a fairly detailed and in-depth discussion, I think, just putting a light on the recent events, I guess, through the last week or so. There's been lots happening in the Parliament about Brexit, and people get lost in terms of what's going on, to be honest, because there's lots and lots of things happening. There was a victory and then a defeat, and we're either leaving on the 31st or we're not leaving on the 31st, and elections on the horizon, lots happening. Anyway, so I think that was a fairly decent discussion. I enjoyed it, at least anyway. Abu Bakr, did you enjoy it?
Yeah, mashallah, it was a very good discussion.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our next topic of discussion. So there is a march, an annual march planned tomorrow. Is it tomorrow? 27th. On the 27th, to mark, I guess, the occupation of Kashmir from that perspective. And the march is basically in London, and I think the routes have been changed recently because of some concerns, etc., which we'll talk about in a bit. And in terms of what's happening in Kashmir, if you don't know, if you haven't been following, Kashmir used to have a semi-autonomous status, I guess, both within Pakistan and India. And there was an article of association, so to speak, which linked Kashmir with the Indian government. And the Indian government decided to revoke that particular article and govern Kashmir centrally. Their view is that they can do a lot more, a lot better for the people of Kashmir if they're governed centrally, as opposed to a semi-autonomous region. So again, it's a heavily militarized region. Lots of, I think, close to 1 million Indian troops in that region to basically quell a rebellion against the government. And in effect, the people of Kashmir on the Indian side have been under lockdown, effectively a siege, since August the 5th. So that's a brief potted history recently. Obviously, the what's happening in Kashmir goes back a very long time in history, back to 1947. We're not going to go through all of that. What we're going to talk about is what's happening in terms of this coming weekend on the 27th. And we're going to talk about some local initiatives that took place to remember, I guess, the people that are under siege and are going through some difficult times at the moment. So with me is Councillor Samira Khorshid, and she organised a Kashmir Peace Vigil in Luton yesterday. Assalamu alaikum, Samira.
Wa alaikum salam.
Jazakallah, shukriya for joining me today. So tell me what this vigil was all about and what you hope to achieve from it.
Thanks for inviting Zaffar Bhai. What it is that since I became a councillor and I've been meeting different from the diverse community, and I've been invited there in their functions, and I've realized that, whenever I get a chance, I speak about Kashmir, and I've realized that, many people are not aware of Kashmir, what's going on in Kashmir. They've heard about Kashmir, but they've not heard, about the curfew, about the revocation of Article 370 and what implications has been built on since then. So whenever I address, and I'm surprised, and I've decided that I think it's a good idea that rather than we Kashmiri, doing the marches and protests, it's a good idea we should involve our diverse community.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way forward, by involving other members of community, because the thing is, it's not about Muslims, it's about human rights violations. And, whenever human rights violations occur, they're deemed to be international. They're not integral part of any country, or they're not associated with the internal issues. They're supposed to be international issue. And as you've already stated, our Kashmiri brothers and sisters, since 5th of May, their status, which has been agreed with them, and that has been taken away. Their rights has been snatched from them. And as we are the representative of that nation, our origins are from there. So I believe that it's our moral duty to speak up, as we've got, we are lucky in a sense that we have been given right of freedom of choice. We've got the right of assembly with a peaceful means. So we should exploit all those, avenues to get justice for them.
Sure.
Because
so what did you actually do in this vigil that you organised?
What's significant about this vigil was that it's the very first time we've got the speaker from the diverse community. We've got Gurpal Bening is the vice president of Gurdwara in Luton. Then we had ex-councillor and ex-mayor Tahir Khan, who represented Bengali community. Then we had Seventh-day Church representative Bernie Holford. Then from South African Caribbean, yes, Sonia Tello. She was on board. And she showed solidarity and support from her side. And then we had the Luton Council of Faith was there. We had a call from Amnesty International, and they've sent their apologies that they couldn't make it, but principally, as you're aware, that they are supporting our cause. So it was a diverse
so what did you
approach.
What did you hope to achieve from this vigil?
What it is, I would like to create awareness. This is what's going on, and it's not acceptable in this day and age. And secondly, that we want them to be part of our struggle. They should be advocating for us, because the thing is that this is human rights violation. And on top, the issue is in within the United Nations since 1948, and as you've probably aware, there's many resolution has been passed. And what India has done is one more thing I would like to add here. Yesterday I gave a very clear message to our Indian community. I said to them that, there's nothing against them. It's not about the Indian people. It's about the regime, who is taking the drastic steps, who is violating the peace treaty, which has been signed in 1972. Famously called Simla Agreement, which clearly says, we will do everything in a friendly manner, with the cooperation, with the peace and harmony, and neither of us will not do anything unilaterally. But the thing is that on the 5th of August, Modi government has unilaterally revoked the Article 370, which was the only bridge between Kashmir and India. So from occupation they've moved to annexation. So which is not acceptable.
Okay. So I've got on the line Basharat Ali. He's of Kashmiri origin, and he's been in Kashmir recently, and he's a solicitor by profession, and he takes a keen interest in Kashmiri politics. Assalamu alaikum, Basharat.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Zaffar, how are you?
Alhamdulillah. Welcome to Inspire FM and Friday Night Live. Okay, so I guess this march that's happening on the 27th, this is an annual event. What's happening? Can you tell us a little bit more?
I think the march is a matter of just highlighting the suffering of the people of Kashmir, of all faiths, but in particular the Muslims of Kashmir, because the actions of the Modi government have targeted the Muslims of Kashmir in particular. All of the rhetoric was very clear. And I think this is good. All means of highlighting the suffering to our fellow citizens, in the media, etc., is important as a means of drawing attention to this. But to be honest with you, there are many marches, and there should be many more. Vigils, I'm all for that. But the way to look at this is asking multilateral bodies like the UN, who are actually, in my opinion, responsible for the suffering of the Kashmiris. And it didn't start on the 5th of August. It didn't start 30 years ago when the uprising started. Kashmir has been an open wound of this Muslim body, like Palestine, since 1947-48. October 1947. So whether it's the Modi government now, or the Congress party before, prior to 5th of August, over 100,000 Kashmiris were killed, tens of thousands injured, hundreds of thousands possibly, women raped, dishonored. And as Muslims, we've got to stop begging others, that is to say governments or international bodies, to help us, because the Kashmiris
this march isn't necessarily about begging. This is about show of unity, isn't it? Show of unity, yeah?
No, forgive me. I didn't say that, and I'm not saying that. Please don't misunderstand me. What I'm saying is that all of this is excellent, and it should be done. Whatever anybody is doing in terms of raising the voice for the Kashmiri, or anybody oppressed, this is about Kashmir, but as Muslims, we should be proud that we follow the Prophet ﷺ, who spoke against all oppression, against all people. But what I want to say is that the answer lies, you and I are both old enough, and other people as well, when the Falklands happened, a little full stop about 13 to 10,000 miles away from London was occupied. And Thatcher sent a task force. And it is said that Thatcher famously remarked in the cabinet, because the cabinet were a bit like the Muslim rulers of the Muslim man, they didn't want to send a military response, and she said, am I the only man in this room? That she was willing to put her money and her mouth where it was needed, because British citizens were occupied by Galtieri's Argentinian army. And also, we know during the Second World War, the French resistance, those that were resisting Nazi occupation, were helped from Britain, amongst other places. And Hitler is the hero of the RSS and Sangh Parivar, who are the support behind the Modi government. The Modi government's a Nazi. And I just want to say, our Prime Minister, Pakistan Imran Khan, rightly said that the Nazis in, in ruling India. Well, Europe did not talk to the Nazis. The Nazis were fought and defeated. And the Kashmiris don't need only our du'as and words, which we must do, but we should be asking the Muslim capitals, in particular Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., that they should put a military response to a military problem.
I'm not sure there is a military solution. That's another topic of discussion, I guess. So I wanted to move on to the fact that this march that was planned, and I think has happened regularly, and the march has always ended up with outside the embassy, the Indian embassy.
High Commission, yes.
The High Commission, that's right, yeah. But this time that's been moved, and it looks like it's been moved at the request of some senior sort of MPs within the parliament.
Well, Keith Vaz
Yeah.
wrote a letter
Yeah.
to ask
Priti
about
Patel.
the march, and to Priti Patel, and Sadiq Khan was also, he condemned the march going to the embassy. Now look, if anybody was protesting against Hindus per se, I would be against that, because
Yeah.
in India, Hindus, Dalits are 200 million plus.
Yeah.
They're Hindus. They're oppressed by the regime. But the Indian High Commission is supposed to represent a secular government for all Indians.
Yeah.
And the Indian government ordered the army, etc., into Kashmir and revoked the Article 370 and 35A. So this is purely a decision to please the Indian lobby and the Indian regime. And Muslims should reflect. Muslim politicians always come with the Islamic line, we're here to help Muslims. Sadiq Khan should be embarrassed and ashamed of himself for agreeing with the likes of Keith Vaz and others, because this man, more than others, has played the Muslim card for securing votes, but when it's come to any Islamic issue, he has pathetically failed every time, more or less, going back to the Iraq War onwards. So
I think he's not here to defend himself. I mean, that's your viewpoint. But I wanted to talk about the fact that there is actually a legal challenge to the decision that was made to actually move it.
That, yeah.
So,
I mean, basically, the way it works is that they've conflated two things. In my opinion, are wrong.
Yeah.
Nobody is demonstrating against Hindus and the Diwali festival. 27th of October is a date when the Kashmiris are marked regularly, and it's not something a one-off. So we all would agree that we should not be targeting Hindus per se, and I would speak out against that.
Yeah.
Now, this has been used deliberately to mislead and misguide the public. Now, in terms of the legal challenge, the problem I foresee will be that judicial review is not an appeal. Okay, so legally, what judicial review means is that the court is only looking at the decision-making process and whether or not the decision was reasonably open, rationally, to a reasonable police officer, because ultimately the Metropolitan Police are responsible for security. So if they say that we think there is a risk of this, that, and the other violence, and they then point to certain incidents, a judge could quite conceivably agree with them.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been to many demonstrations going back 30-odd years. I used to go to demonstrations for Kashmir. We all did back when we were school kids and teenagers in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I don't remember any of us using any violence, and nor should people be damaging or defacing the Indian High Commission. That would make you.
But that's an accusation in itself, isn't it? The fact that that the demonstrations were actually violent, and in fact they weren't violent. There was a few eggs.
From what I remember, they weren't. But they're obviously putting forward evidence. And as I said, the political influence in the whole of this is clear. And that has been, whether it's to do with Kashmir or other places, sadly, India is a market of 1 billion plus. And the politics, unfortunately, I mean, the Metropolitan Police have had some pressure, I think, indirectly and directly upon them. Ultimately, some police officer has called this, and I'm not saying the police officer is in the pocket of the Indian High Commission or anything, but until people started raising this, politicians like Keith Vaz, we've never had these demonstrations, as you rightly pointed out, being turned away from the Indian High Commission in the past. So it seems completely peculiar and out of step with what's happened in the past.
Right. Okay. So just one final word in terms of I guess the legal. What chances that legal challenge is going to succeed? Seeing that it's only a couple. Well, there's run out of time, really, haven't they?
No, because you can make what are called interim applications, emergency applications. The administrative court of the High Court, the division of the High Court, which sits.
Yeah.
There's a judge always on duty 365 days a year, or 66 in a leap year, and you can try and get what's called interim relief. That is to say that a court should order a particular course of conduct until the matter is resolved. Now, I'm not privy to the claim that's been pleaded. The legal case, if it has been lodged. If it hasn't been lodged, you can still bring an application for an injunction out of hours, and the judge may well order them down to the High Court or possibly his house. It's not unknown that judges sometimes order parties. Now, the people that are bringing these proceedings, I'm hoping they're well aware of these things. A judge could quite conceivably rule in favour of the demonstration as well. It's not by all means a foregone conclusion. I'm not saying that judges will rather stamp.
Right. Okay. So I guess the net effect of this ruling, net effect of Met Police's actions is that the march has been rerouted to another route, right? And I guess if people want to join the march, right, they have to find out where this route is, and I guess the organisers will let people know.
From Downing Street down to Trafalgar Square. Sorry to interrupt you.
Right.
They're not allowing it to go to the Old Witch India House, which is right at the bottom of the
Right, okay.
Yeah, Kingsway, that's right.
Right. Sister Samira, I've got a question right from Suleiman. He's asking, do you think that authorities in power who can help Kashmir care about marches in Luton or London or any vigils?
Say it again.
The people in power, the authorities, people who have the authority to make a difference in Kashmir, do you think they care about marches in Luton or London or vigil?
So which authorities he's talking about?
I guess people who can make change, the politicians, the big leaders, the prime ministers, the presidents, etc.
The thing is that the powers are with the people. It lies with the people, and it's up to the people how they're going to use those powers to make a difference. So it's up to us, to be honest. It's as you already stated, it's our cause, and nobody's going to, bring freedom for us. We have to take it ourselves, and we have to persuade it, and we have to have those valid arguments, and dialogue is the only way forward. Historically, we've seen that that's the way forward. And
okay, so I guess things like marches and vigils, I think, all very well in terms of bringing people together. The ultimate aim of marches and vigils is to highlight the cause.
That's correct.
And I guess now in the social media world, there are ways to reach a lot more people using social media.
That's correct.
So I guess the question is do these marches and vigils, are they effective anymore?
They are definitely. If you look at the protest which is happening in Hong Kong, where the Chinese government has to take the extradite bill. The thing is, and it only happens because of those protests. And protests are there. The thing is that in democratic world, it is the right of the people to show their anger in a peaceful manner and tell the government this is not acceptable. And this is also the means of keeping the issues alive, to be honest. If we're not going to do any of these type of things, then we'll forget about it. So it's very important to keep the momentum going. As I always stated this, that we, till we have the freedom, we have to keep the momentum going in terms of marches, in terms of vigils, in terms of, as I'm suggesting my own community, that we need to reach out to the churches, to the gurdwaras, to the whichever community, to be honest, and we need to flag this issue, that this is an issue and it's not a territorial issue. It's about human rights issue, and it should be addressed.
Right, okay. So on this issue, I just wanted to ask both of you on this issue. What comment has there been from the Indian Muslim community? Because there's 12, parts of India, some estimates 12 to 18%.
200 million,
yeah.
What's your thoughts on that? Is there a response from the Indian Muslims to what's happening in Kashmir?
I mean, just to echo what's been said by the councillor, demonstrations draw attention. So if you want to explain to your colleagues and friends, most people are not aware of the Kashmir issue. So the easiest example, which all of us who grew up or studied here or studied the Holocaust are aware of, the Warsaw Ghetto, where Jews, by virtue of them being Jews, were herded into a ghetto in Warsaw in Poland and targeted. And if you mention that to any person who's semi-literate in history, instantly they know what that means. The Warsaw Ghetto is tending towards a potential concentration. It's the biggest Warsaw Ghetto in history, 9 million people. That's the population of London. That's 20 Lutons, I think, near enough. So that's how you would explain to people that there is a place which, under Indian rule, and just as Hitler as a Nazi did that. Modi as a Nazi is doing the same thing. Now, regarding the issue about you, in answer to your question, the Indian Muslims are a disparate group, and many of them are openly supporting the Indian government because they believe in a secular Indian constitution. And for them, the God, forgive me, is the nation. You know, there's a very famous poem that Iqbal mentioned, and I'll translate it for you, but adequately sums it up. He said, Kya Muslim ne mir kya haram or? Has the Muslim built his own haram, like Makkah, yeah? Is that haram? Tahzeeb ke azar ne tarashwa sanam or? That the high priests of the civilization have created, the azar is Ibrahim alayhi salam's father, okay? The father of Abraham, the idol maker. And sanam is somebody you love. He said, in taza khudaon mein sabse bada watan hai, jo pairhan iska hai, wo mazhab ka kafan hai. I.e., the biggest god of all of these gods is the nation or the state. If the divided Muslims cut the body into pieces, and the one who wears this clothing of nationalism is wearing the coffin of Islam. Okay. Because Islam pushes unity. And the Muslims of India, like Muslims in other parts of the world, believe in this nationalist concept. And therefore,
we've got about 50 seconds, Bashar, so you have to conclude.
I'll summarize it for you. So they are putting a nationalist, many Muslims in India are against this, but a lot of Muslims in India are putting India first, like Pakistan first, like Turkey first. So nationalism has focusing us down a rabbit's hole, which doesn't help any oppressed community, whether it's the Syrians, the Kashmiris, the Palestinians, and so on. So,
Bashar, Jazakallah for that, Bashar. I'm sorry to cut you off. We're running out of time.
No,
Jazakallah for your contributions. I really appreciate it. And Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Sister Samara, Assalamu alaikum. We run out of time completely, so thank you very much for coming to the studio and talking about this.
Thanks,
and hopefully your vigil will create ripples.
Thank you.
Listeners, inshallah, we'll be back after this short break.
Thanks ever so much.
You're listening to an Inspire FM podcast, making available our popular programs from our daily broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. You're listening to Inspire FM. This is Friday Night Live. My name is Zaffar Iqbal. With me in the studio is Abu Bakr Cooper, who's co-hosting with me today. Before the break, we were talking about the Kashmir March that's planned for the 27th. That's this coming weekend. And before that, we talked about Brexit. Next item of discussion, we've often talked about Prevent on this program. We talked about Prevent as a government initiative to create, I guess, another narrative among Muslims, and some people argue that it's targeting Muslims in an unfair way in order to try and I guess I'm trying to sort of find a suitable sort of form of words which describes this, so trying to steer them away, I guess, from the violence that some members of the community actually partook in. So there's a lot of people who are seeing this as draconian set of, I guess, policies and the ways particularly targeting the Muslim community. And this policy has been reviewed, and it's been reviewed by an independent reviewer who was nominated by the government. And he's basically, his review is basically being challenged. And is being challenged in a way, I guess, which our next guest, inshallah, is going to describe for us. We have on the line Yasmin Ahmad. She's from Right Watch UK. Assalamu alaikum, Yasmin.
Wa alaikum salam.
Jazakallah for joining Friday Night Live. Welcome to Inspire FM. I just wanted to sort of perhaps if you can give us a bit of a background. So now we had Lord Carlisle, who's reviewed the Prevent program. The Prevent program, as I think everybody knows, is a government-led initiative. It was counter extremism sort of a program, which is seen as I guess. There's a bit of an overreach, I guess, right, which a lot of people fear that this particular program is directing towards the Muslim community, and it's basically has had some bad press and is being reviewed by, or the government got it to be reviewed by somebody who I guess is being challenged for his impartiality. Is that right? Does that sum it up, or perhaps is it a different story?
Yeah. No, I think that sort of sums it up. So yeah, essentially, Rights Watch UK has been looking at and sort of analysing the impacts of the government's counter-extremism program Prevent for a number of years. Mm-hmm. And in so doing, we've identified a number of harms that this strategy gives rise to, including issues around freedom of expression, around religious expression and belief. There are the right to education. A lot of different issues have arisen as a result of this strategy, including the statutory duty to report signs of extremism, which, as you know, was introduced in 2015. We, as a result, have been calling for the establishment of an independent review for some time, and that was subsequent to a report that we produced in 2016, which set out in a lot of detail the harms that this strategy gives rise to, as well as the fundamental flaws that we think are inherent in the strategy, which actually give rise to those harms. So the government were forced to actually establish this independent review as a result of an amendment that was put before Parliament to a bill that went through earlier this year. So they had to establish it, and they have, in fact, established an independent review. Before the independent review was the independent reviewer was announced, Rights Watch said, look, what we will do is we will write a proposed terms of reference for the review, as well as a background briefing which will set out the principles which underlie that review. And in so doing, we spoke with members of the community across the United Kingdom, so Muslim communities. We spoke with people who were involved in other reviews that we felt had been quite successful, including the Windrush Review and other reviews. And we spoke to people who had been, for example, involved in similar reviews from being a reviewer, including the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation and the previous people who'd held that position. And in so doing, we developed a very comprehensive terms of reference, and also we proposed someone who we thought would be a good independent reviewer and who had trust of the communities.
Mm-hmm. Who did you propose?
One of the things that we said, we proposed a Baroness Nuala Olaine, who had been the police ombudsman, so someone who'd overseen police activities in Northern Ireland for a number of years. And we felt that she had the relevant experience, and she held credibility with communities, and we felt she was distant enough from the situation, but understood the context sufficiently so as to be able to imbue the confidence that both the government and communities and other civil society would need for this review to be effective. And really that comes to the point of our challenge. So the government didn't take heed of our terms of reference, which included that anyone appointed to the independent review should be done so by the public appointment process, which would ensure that there was an element of transparency around this. They didn't do that, and behind closed doors, the government appoints Lord Carlisle. Now, we are of the view that this person, Lord Carlisle, apart from any views we may have or others may have about him and the views he holds, that we say that he is not able to chair the kind of review that is necessary, and that was what Parliament had intended for this to review to do. And
on what grounds would you say that about Lord Carlisle?
So what we would say that so first of all, what was it that Parliament intended? Parliament intended that there would be a review that would be able to independently assess the different positions around Prevent, that would look at those that had concerns and had raised concerns over a number of years about Prevent, those that have been impacted by Prevent, including communities, as well as those who were supportive of Prevent, the government, people who have been implementing it, and be able to take all of that into account and make an independent assessment as to the veracity of this policy and its impact. The government appoints somebody who has been involved in Prevent for a number of years. He was the independent reviewer of the strategy in 2011 when it saw, and the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, but also specifically the independent review of Prevent in 2011, which saw the expansion of Prevent into non-violent extremism, which has obviously huge significance. He's also on the oversight board of Prevent. So if there were any issues around adequate oversight, he himself has been involved in that. But more fundamentally, he has been consistently on the record in support of Prevent, in essentially saying those that have raised concerns about Prevent these concerns have no evidential basis, they have no founding, there is nothing to suggest that's true. He's just essentially categorically dismissed any concerns anyone's raised about Prevent.
So in essence, what you're saying, is that he's not independent enough.
Can I just read a quote out that I found attributed to Lord Carlisle?
Just finish what.
No, because if I could just do this, because
okay.
I'm sure Yasmin want to pick up on this. When this is reported in the Independent, Yasmin, when Lord Carlisle appeared at a summit in Canada in May, he said that a Prevent reviewer, quote, was completely unnecessary, based on fictitious or a complete lack of evidence, and was only agreed to because the government doesn't have a majority in the House of Commons. So, paradoxically, he himself has actually said it doesn't need
reviewing.
A reviewing.
Right, okay.
And they've appointed him to be the reviewer.
Yeah, quite. And he's just dismissed arguments that I quote as absolute nonsense, evidence which has been put forward as to the harms as absolute nonsense, and as the arguments made to liberate the activities of some who are opposed to the very essence of our democratic way of life. So he's essentially saying that those people who have raised any concerns are essentially in opposition to the very essence of our democratic way of life. So, I mean, we're saying that someone such as that cannot be able to give effect to the review that is necessary in this circumstance. And I mean, to be honest, it's absolutely preposterous that the government would do this. It's a slap in the face of those communities which have been impacted by Prevent, and all of those that have been calling, and it's not just civil society, it's UN experts, it's parliamentary groups. I mean, there are calls upon calls for a proper independent review of the strategy, and this just flies in the face of it. And essentially what we can see is the government appointing someone who's so very heavily invested in it, who cannot give effect to the kind of review that's necessary.
Okay, so I just want to bring in Dr. Layla, who's a senior caseworker for Prevent Watch. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Layla.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I can hear you, sir. Assalamu alaikum. So I just wanted to sort of, I know Yasmin mentioned some harms that Prevent has caused. Perhaps, being a caseworker, perhaps you can identify some of the harms that have been identified or linked to Prevent, through the work that you've been doing. Just to sort of, I guess, give us a flavour of the reasons why Prevent is reviewing.
Okay, so just to give a bit of a background in terms of what Prevent is supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Prevent is supposed to be a duty to have due regard to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as Yasmin just mentioned, in the 2011 revision of the strategy, that shift was made between forget terrorism, but actually non-violent extremism, to trying to prevent, from preventing violent extremism to preventing non-violent extremism. And what Prevent is if somebody is referred to Prevent, then that means that somebody has been identified as being vulnerable to radicalization. Now, the harms that it produces, as Prevent Watch, we've supported over 500 clients. So we've seen the trends within those 500 clients, as well as the individual cases and stories. We've had children as young as 3 being referred to Prevent. Now, how you identify that a child as young as 3 is vulnerable to being radicalized is beyond me, especially since the actual risk factors behind Prevent have been shown to be completely unscientific and based on the pseudoscience. But some of the things that we've seen are things such as, the government actually suggests there are about 7,000 per year referrals. Okay. Now, 95% of those are saying it doesn't matter. They don't actually end up in channel. Yeah, we only have a few hundred people who need intervention, and it's fine because other people haven't been impacted. Of course, they've been impacted. They've had police officers knock at the door, or they've been interviewed by social workers. They've been potentially interrogated at school by, or in front of teachers who essentially they had that trusting relationship with, and now your teachers just referred you to Prevent. How do you re-establish that connection, whether you're a student, whether you're a parent going to pick up your child from school? We've had parents take their kids out of school and homeschool them because they just cannot go back to that school. They don't feel comfortable, even though nothing came of it, and it was just, but they still had to go through that process. They still had to be questioned by police officers or have social workers come into their homes and determine whether or not they have the right mindset, or they practice Islam to the right degree, or to what is seen as socially acceptable, Islam, and not, extreme enough.
Sure. So if I can bring Yasmin back again. Yasmin, some of these examples, I guess, are probably familiar to yourself, and that's probably some of the reasons why Prevent needs a review, an independent review. Why do you think the government is reluctant to basically look for somebody who is truly independent, and I guess agree to have some a review, but have it done by somebody who's actually vested in the whole process? Why do you think that is the case?
So obviously, in terms of the litigation that we are bringing, it remains to be seen as to what the government will say with respect to the litigation, and why they will say, in fact, this was the right decision. But from what we can glean, we can only make an assumption at the moment, and the assumption that we could make is essentially that they are not confident in the policy that they in fact have, and they are concerned about the impact that this has.
Right.
And so if it was in fact to be thoroughly, properly, independently and effectively reviewed, that there is a chance that part or all of the Prevent strategy will be scrapped. And that not only has implications for the government internally, but it's also a policy that the government has been actively exporting globally. And it's really problematic because they've been exporting it to countries which really don't have any kind of rule of law framework whereby anyone who's essentially opposing the government can be labelled as an extremist. And we obviously see the harms that have arisen here, but they can also apply, and sometimes to greater degree, elsewhere. So I think as a colleague from Prevent Watch stated, I think one of the biggest problems around this is that the evidential basis that underpins this whole strategy, which is that you can identify someone who holds certain views and say that they are potentially at risk of going towards carrying out acts of violence on the basis of just views that they hold, is being fundamentally and across the board discredited. And if it's not that underpins it, then the government have provided no information as to what actually underpins this whole strategy, which really worryingly brings the state into this non-criminal pre-crime space where they're starting to essentially look over our shoulder as to things we're saying and doing, which are completely lawful, but essentially branded as they want as extremists. And it's obviously extremism is so broadly defined in the strategy that it leaves the door open for anything, and it leaves the door open for
anyone, I guess,
harms that happen. Yeah, exactly. So, we are saying, and we have also requested that the government provide the evidential basis for the strategy, or at least for the indicators of extremism, which is a study called the ERG22. We've said to the government, if you are certain that your strategy is the right strategy and it's underpinned by good evidence, then you can release this to us. And to this date, the government has not released that study to us. That says quite a lot in terms of their confidence around this strategy. And this strategy is not one that just impacts one or two people. It impacts whole communities. It also really impacts young Muslims and other people who are targeted as they're growing up in terms of a sense of identity and being part of the community. And what we're saying is that all needs to be taken account of. First of all, Lord Carlisle is not the right person to do this, given what he has said and his positions. And secondly, if there is to be a review, it needs to be a proper review that has a robust terms of reference that looks at all of these things, and most importantly, it engages with the communities and the people who are impacted. At the moment, all we are using so far is Lord Carlisle has sent out a questionnaire which provides 2,000-word answers, which is, really so minimal that you can fill in online. How is that at the moment? And the review is limited to looking at effectiveness, not looking at impact. So, on so many different levels, this review is just not right. And we've done, as Rights Watch and others, have done all we can to engage the government. We provided them with the draft terms of reference, with the name of someone. And since then, we have said to them, this is just not the right appointment. You need to reconsider it. Labor has said the same thing. A number of other people have said it. And the government have refused, and he has continued on. And this is really, the judicial review is the last chance we have before Lord Carlisle comes out with what we can potentially see may well be a report that endorses, entrenches, and further promotes a very harmful strategy.
And so what hope do you have that your challenge is going to be successful in? And what do you hope to achieve? Sorry.
Yeah, we have it. We think we have a reasonable chance of success. I don't think it's very difficult with any litigation to say as a certainty. We think we have a reasonable chance of success, particularly given his statements before, and particularly given what Parliament had intended in terms of setting up this review and what they wanted it to do. So we think that there's a reasonable chance of success. We have established a crowd justice page, which was basically help us provide funding for this litigation, which if people who are listening were interested in, you can find it on our website, which is at www.rwuk.org. And if you go into the front page and you click into our information about the judicial review, there is a link to that, and that is something that would be very helpful from people who felt that they wanted to support this, no matter how big or small the donations are. If you go to the site, that would be helpful for us. Okay,
so I just want to bring in Dr. Leila again. Dr. Leila, there was reports, I guess, recently that the police were actually using some of the information that was gained through the whole prevent process, and the reports questioned whether that was the rightful use of the information. Do you have any more on that?
Yeah, so we have seen this. We've seen that information is shared even without consent, and we know that the government is storing information that they're getting through Prevent on this database. And that is something also that hasn't been addressed by the terms of reference. So the issue with the review is not just Lord Carlisle and his lack of independence, not because critics think he's not independent, but by his own admission. And just a quick search of Lord Carlisle, you can find all of his quotes, not where he is in support, not just where he's in support of Prevent, but where he's completely dismissed any concern. And he's agreed himself that, look, if it wasn't for the fact that we didn't have a majority, we wouldn't even need to entertain this review in the first place. But the terms of reference have no indication in terms of they're only looking at the effectiveness of the implementation of Prevent, and they don't want to look at incompatibility with any other act that's been established to protect our safety and security, such as the compatibility of Prevent due to freedom of speech, with the Equalities Act, with the Children's Act, with personal information management. And like you said, it's just recently been shared that this database exists, but what we've seen through anecdotal evidence is we knew this all along. We knew that there was information being stored, and people have challenged this from our cases to say, look, I want you to remove my data, and am I on a database? And of course, they don't have a sort of criminal record, but their soft data exists there. And an enhanced DBS could actually pull up your information. So imagine you've been referred to Prevent, nothing's come of it. However, years down the line, if something then happens, they would go back to that information and say, oh, well, you see, you were initially referred, and therefore our initial referral was thing, and they kind of join the dots.
Is that not governed by, say, for example, GDPR or some other privacy
No,
type
clearly not. I mean, this could be a challenge that could be taken on in terms of how it conflicts with GDPR.
Okay.
Just to add to that, there are data protection principles and laws that regulate the collation, storage and sharing of data, and that's something that we and Prevent Watch and the others have raised continuously, because as my colleague suggested, there have been a number of instances where we've been very concerned about the collation of data and the fact that there doesn't appear to be any principles whatsoever which regulates this. And as Layla was saying, that essentially we don't know how and in what way and this is going to be used, who it's being shared with. I mean, one of the questions is to what extent information derived from Prevent is then channeled into the Pursue strand, which is actually about pursuing people who are committing acts of terrorism. And as I was saying, what other uses that information and where that information is coming up. And we're talking about also very young children here.
Sure, yes.
So, I mean, it's deeply, deeply problematic.
So one of the things I think that I guess that there's increasing focus on other sources of terrorism, the right wing being one of them. Well, what evidence is there that this Prevent Watch is actually extended to them? It's not exclusively for focus on Muslims. Is there any?
I mean, the majority of our cases are Muslims. We've been set up since 2014 in reaction and in recognition of the Prevent duty becoming statutory in 2015. That's why Prevent Watch was set up, because we recognised that actually there would be an increase in referrals off the back of that legal duty. We do have some cases that are non-Muslim, however, they are far and few between. Whether that's because there is a sort of lack of recognition, or whether or not because there's so many Muslim cases that have come through the pipeline already, and these other forms of extremism have more recently been highlighted almost as a success of Prevent, which it really isn't. I mean, going from, I think as Theresa May said, we want to look at all forms of extremism. We want to look at non-violent, violent, ideological, non-ideological. Basically what she's saying is, and I think David Cameron even said this, is that it all comes down to British values, and actually if you don't adhere to whatever the British values that the government of the day suggests is the British values you should be adhering to, then you're an extremist.
It is certainly worrying when you have a situation where Muslim communities are saying that they're losing trust with it. And then I'm actually going to read another Lord Carlisle quoted again here, and he's saying that he doesn't. I'm just paraphrasing here. I can't find the exact paragraph, but I'm just paraphrasing what he said, that he didn't believe that there was any substance to there being a loss of trust with communities, with the Prevent system.
With that, I'm going to have to call an end to this session. Thank you very much, Yasmin and Dr. Layla, for your contribution today. It's been really thoroughly enjoyable. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Listeners, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back after this break.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Atif Nawaz. Listen to Inspire FM shows in your time by heading over to inspirefm.org or listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. You're listening to Inspire FM. My name is Zaffar. This is Friday Night Live. And with me is Abu Bakr Cooper, who is co-presenting today with me. And we were talking about Prevent early on, before the break. We were talking about the challenge by Rights Watch UK to the independent reviewer of Prevent, Lord Carlisle, who is deemed to be involved in the Prevent process itself, so therefore not independent enough. And Yasmin Ahmed presented a case in terms of the reasons why he should not be reviewing Prevent. We're going to move on to a slightly different topic, a health-related topic now. And we're going to we're going to be picking up on some statistics that are presented by the MCB in one of their conferences, where they suggested that 1 in 10 of Muslims was suffering from mental health issues. And I guess this is a fairly wide, I guess, phenomena within the community. Not sure whether it's historic or recent, but definitely I think there's some cases, I guess, right, which point to that direction. I remember many years ago there was a child psychologist actually from Northern Ireland. I forget his name. Who came in this the dialogue committee centre itself. He did a series of workshops in trying to identify, I guess, ways of bringing up children, and then signs for spotting, issues with behaviour, and then suggesting some ways on how to counter them. So I guess this is not a new thing. This has been around for a while in terms of I guess issues around mental health. We have Imam Roziur Rahman, Imam Roza, who's a Muslim chaplain on mental health for the NHS, who's joined us. Inshallah, we're going to talk to him about, first of all, the prevalence of mental health among Muslims. Assalamu alaikum, Imam Roza.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you very much for volunteering and coming on. I know it's a topic that we should talk about more often, and I think more often than not we don't talk about it often enough. So I thought we touched on it last week, but I wanted to get a full spectrum on mental health issues within the Muslim community. I mean, I touched on the fact that there was a statistic released by the MCB in one of our conferences where they suggested that 1 in 10 Muslims are suffering from mental health. That's 10% of the population. Quite a lot, I would have thought. What's your experience? Is it an issue or not an issue?
It's a major issue, and people don't necessarily, when I talk about people, I'm talking about Muslims in general. Yeah. A lot of Muslims, in my experience, don't necessarily relate mental health to being a religious sort of perspective. Mm-hmm. There are people who look at it culturally. There are individuals who look at it from a religious point of view. So when we're talking about statistics, and when we're talking about individuals, we need to look at the criteria set out in order to identify mental health perspectives within the Muslim community. Because in my view, Muslims relate Islam in various ways. You have spiritual Muslims, you have cultural Muslims, and you have religious Muslims. Yeah. So we've got to be very careful about how we depict what mental health is within the various types of individuals.
Yeah, okay. So perhaps we can start off with a medical definition of it, I guess, and then there's lots of different ways, mental health basically manifests itself. And I guess if we can start talking about that first of all, and then we can talk about, I guess, from an Islamic perspective.
So basically, mental health, similar to physical health, is a sense of well-being within a spectrum of various types of harmonies, which are facilitated within the mind throughout one's life. Sure. So mental health, we all have it, but sometimes it dips, and sometimes it goes way beyond sort of the exuberance that people may have in terms of overthinking, etc., etc., etc. So mental health really refers to the health of the mind, and the balance of the mind when making decisions in life, etc., etc. And due to circumstances, whether it's social circumstances, medical circumstances, or any other circumstance, that the health that we have within our mind can dip. And when it dips, that is when the mental health services are available to facilitate those individuals who have a dip within their mental health to bring it back up into a normal state.
Right, okay. So you've actually identified two things there. Normal state and dips, the health dips. Let's talk about when it dips, what sort of things are we looking at? A physical injury you can recognize. Illness you can recognize because you've got, got temperature and you're coughing or whatever. What's a dip in mental health from a mental health perspective?
A dip in mental health, and bearing in mind this is quite fluid in terms of the interpretation of mental health, as you've already highlighted before. A dip in mental health refers to, for example, someone acting in a way which is contrary to their normal state. Right. So, for example, someone who's engaging all the time and all of a sudden becomes reclusive. Right, okay. Becomes isolated, becomes static, someone who is eating healthily and all of a sudden they're not healthy anymore, they're wanting to sort of drown their sorrows, or drown whatever it is that they're going through a series of binge eating, etc., etc., etc. Some people who have never drank before, and yet they're drinking because they're going through depression, etc. These are all examples of my experiences in dealing with Muslims within my area of work.
Right. Okay. So it's basically, I think that I guess you described some of the symptoms. Depression. I think you mentioned the word depression being one indicator of mental health. Is there any other indicators, or triggers maybe for that?
Yeah. So for example, one of the biggest triggers of mental health issues within the Muslim community, in my experience, is an intergenerational divide, which is widening as years pass by within people who are migrants and first or second or third born Muslims growing up in the UK. And as a result of that, because of the differences within the generations, you have people who want one thing, but they have to abide by a particular set of rules because that's the way they've been brought up. And that causes discrete sadness and depression, and also, dare I say, loneliness within one's mind, which causes them to either become suicidal, it causes them to not do well within their studies, and some people can be quite rebellious as a result of that as well, against their families as well.
Well, so, you defined quite a few for symptoms there again. I'm just trying to sort of narrow down. I'm looking at somebody who's looking at somebody who doesn't consider themselves as having mental health issues, consider themselves as normal, but somebody who's, I guess, trained in spotting mental health issues would probably describe that they have some tendencies. Well, what are the typical sort of things? I mean, you talk about feeling a little bit sad. You talk about a little bit depressed. What are some of the? I mean, these are normal moods anyway. I mean, you go through moods and you've got mood swings and whatever. When does it become an issue, a health issue?
When the issue becomes hazardous to one's health, when it becomes hazardous to one's environment, and when it becomes hazardous to one's society, in all three elements, that is when it becomes a cause for concern, for authorities or for those related.
Sure, I can get that from authorities' perspective, but I guess that's at an extreme fringe end. There's got to be somewhere sort of you're off the middle ground. You're heading towards that direction. What are the symptoms, sort of things, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what
I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah. So go. Sorry.
What I'm trying to get at here is mental health illness is very, very subjective. Even as I talk to you now, it's very subjective in terms of what is deemed as mental health illness and what isn't. I mean, if you look in books or look in sort of research papers, etc., and all that, there are differing views on that. But the point being here is that in terms of my work within the NHS, what we look out for is hazards, and we try to remove those hazards by way of counselling, etc., in order to bring that person to a state of reasoning within themselves.
Okay. So I guess the sorts of things that I guess you look for are things like depression being somebody in a mood for a prolonged period. Everybody goes through a mood session, I guess.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, so he goes for a prolonged period. Somebody worrying as well, maybe worrying about the future and worrying
so you may have come across categorizations of different types of mental health illnesses, and each categorization refers to a different type of sort of characteristic that one may have in a prolonged state, which then becomes a hazard,
Okay.
So overthinking, for example, OCD. For example, I've come across patients within the hospital, Muslims, who they take up to nearly an hour to do wudu.
Right. Okay.
Because they're not quite sure whether or not the wudu's been done or not.
Right.
So we use various types of techniques to reduce the amount of time they spend within wudu to just purely the sunnah method, which is 3 times on each limb, etc.
Okay.
And people do get discharged. Don't get me wrong. Those who do enter mental health hospitals are not there for long. They get the right sort of help, and then they leave with a fresh new outlook on life.
Sure. Okay. So there is cure available. We're going to get to that in a minute. So we've touched on depression, right? If somebody feeling down for a prolonged period of time. You touched on OCD. OCD meaning obsessive compulsive syndrome, is it?
Disorder. Correct.
This disorder, and that's when people are, so worried about being clean. Is that right? Staying clean, or
that is correct. Yes. So germs, bacteria, you name it.
Right. So overly obsessed and worried about sort of being I guess touched with germs, etc. And the other thing is worried about the future. You mentioned anxiety, worried about the future.
Anxiety, the various types of anxiety disorders as well. Yeah. Social anxiety disorder, etc. We even have hold on. Social media therapy as well.
So there's two of them. So you talked about social anxiety. Social anxiety meaning that you fear being among a group of people, right, or public.
That is correct, yes.
Right, and then anxiety generally meaning that you think things are going to be worse than what they're,
exactly. Or if I walk down the street, then something's going to pop out or whatever,
Right, excessively worrying about things that may happen. Okay, so we kind of touched on the different sort of symptoms of mental health issues, and these are, I guess, recognized by health professionals, and then they've got ways of dealing with them, I guess.
That's correct.
Okay, so let's talk about the medical way of dealing with them, and then we talk about the Islamic way. Perhaps we can touch on how we can prevent these type of things and how we can deal with them going forward. Yeah. So let's look at some. I mean, you're all involved in NHS. What sort of things? Let's say, for example, you're dealing with a case of depression. How do you deal with that?
So if a patient comes in and they're diagnosed with depression, first and foremost, what we do is we first and foremost look at their history in terms of the background as to why they've come into the hospital. So depending on the circumstance, we then approach the individual in that context. Let me give you an example. Yeah. A Muslim woman was beaten up by her husband last month. Yeah. And when she came into the hospital, she was very, very depressed. Yeah. And she was feeling suicidal. Yeah. And when she came to the hospital, we did not administer any sort of drugs or any medications to her. Yeah. All we did was basically we allowed her to become comfortable, get to know us, etc. And then we sort of we normally start off with talking therapies. So what I mean by that is we sort of normally sit down with them, have a cup of coffee or whatever, and just speak to them or allow them to talk about some of their feelings, etc. and all that. Yeah. Dependent on how the conversation goes, what the sort of symptoms are within the individual. In other words, are they erratic in their speech? Are they aggressive? Are they, X, Y, and Z? Yeah. Medication may be given upon the request of either the consultant or dependent on how the situation is with the individual. So this Muslim lady, she was given antidepressants to calm her nerves during the night time. So when she woke up, she was very calm in that sense. Mm-hmm. So sometimes doses are given twice a day, sometimes they're given once a day. Yeah. It really depends on the circumstances of the individual in terms of how much they need and how much they don't need. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the typical sort of medical related therapy and some talking related therapy. And is it a similar sort of approach with other types of mental health issues?
Without a doubt. In every circumstance, it's all subjective, but we always start with talking therapies. We don't necessarily give them injection or tablets or anything like that. We normally basically allow them to express themselves and see how they are. And dependent on that, we have multidisciplinary meetings, and we then talk about what course of action needs to be taken in the interest of the individual. Mm.
Brother, what experience have you had of misunderstanding from a cultural perspective, issues with jinn and so forth? Because I would have thought it's very important to first of all make sure that you've excluded that there's a definite medical cause to a problem. Have you come across this?
Yeah. So basically, when you have multidisciplinary meetings regarding any patients, we look at the biological issues around the patient. We look at the psychological issues, and we also look at spiritual issues as well. We don't cancel anything out whatsoever. We always look at every single possible avenue in terms of what's affecting the individual. In fact, the hospitals that I work at now, due to transcultural training which I deliver to doctors, etc., are now accepting of the fact that there could be spiritual illnesses which can cause individuals become, erratic or anything like that. So we look at every single avenue in regards to the treatment of the patient. I must say, up until now today, I have not come across any patients within any of the hospitals, I'm talking about Muslim patients here, in which I've had to do ruqya or anything of that sort. I've always used Quran as a first point of contact with Muslim patients. So in other words, reading Quran with them, etc. and all that. But I haven't specifically done any ruqya in a specific sense as of yet.
So can you expand on that? I mean, spiritual. You're looking at spiritual causes of these. Just talk a little bit more about that. What's the...
Let me give you a most recent issue which happened yesterday, actually.
Okay.
An imam who leads one of the mosques here. Yeah. He was caught walking around the streets after Isha Salah, shouting out Quranic verses and giving the adhan here and there. When people were talking to him, he wouldn't listen to them, and he was walking across the street, nearly got run over, etc. When he was brought into the hospital, and I had a chat with him, I found out that he basically felt that his calling, meaning his da'wah that he was doing, was so excessive on his mind that he felt that he could not sleep, because he felt like doing da'wah for him was a 24/7 thing, and basically it became very overbearing for that individual. Now, giving da'wah was a fantastic thing, but overdoing it and not having time to look after yourself, etc. and all that, can basically cause that thing that you are doing to become poisonous for your own mental state.
Okay. All right. Okay,
due to lack of rest and perspective into other things and enjoyment in other parts of your life. Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at some of the I guess from an Islamic perspective. How do you treat somebody? I would say, this statement might be a little bit over the top, but if you have, I guess, taqwa, and you have tawakkul Allah, and you have your strong iman, right? You don't get mentally ill because you have an escape route, you have a catch, basically. How true is that statement?
Well, in Surah Al-Kahf, there's a verse in there which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ إِن لَمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he's addressing him, saying that فَلَعَلَّكَ, maybe you want to finish yourself on a mountain due to the fact that your own people are not listening to you and believing in Allah. Now, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, way beyond any of us, is close to Allah. He's a prophet of Allah. He's Habibullah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew and recognized and saw that he was depressed because people were not accepting Islam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through this verse, was giving him encouragement that, look, regardless whether people believe or not, your job is to give da'wah, so don't stress upon the fact that they haven't believed, etc. So I think in the context of mental illness or anything like that, or anything about depression or feeling sad or suicidal, if you look at the Quran in an in-depth fashion, or even in the books of Hadith, you'll find there is a lot of substance there which can be used to create models of Islamic counselling from a Muslim perspective. And there are models which are being applied in Manchester, in other parts of the UK, because I've been travelling extensively for the past couple of months to seek and find out what's going on out there in relation to this.
If I could, just in reply to what you brought up, from a medical perspective, Zaffar, I think you really need to appreciate that if you think about the brain as literally a biochemical machine in which the soul resides, and I would say as a doctor, previous doctor, that it's a very commonly misunderstood issue that one's iman and tawakkul and trust in Allah can keep your mental health normal. It's a very, very common misunderstood thing.
Misunderstood.
Yes, because what you need to appreciate is that, how can I put it? You wouldn't say the brain itself is a functional organ of the body. So you wouldn't say, for example, oh, well, you've got heart disease because of lack of trust in Allah. You would naturally say, well, it's because I've got an illness and I've got a mechanical fault, or I've got a valve that is not working properly. And simply because people have this misunderstood thing that their soul controls their brain. What you need to appreciate is our brain occupies our soul occupies the brain. And the brain, just like the heart, can become diseased and unwell. And as a result of that, although the soul is there, because the brain is not functioning properly, this is what can lead to you feeling mentally unwell. It is a massively misunderstood thing, and a classical thing that medical students will try to do when they for the first time when they start to see mentally ill patients is they try to rationalise, how has this happened? Why is it that this person has got these thoughts? And very quickly then you realise, well, there is no rationalising the mental illness, because the actual problem is the machine itself is where it has become faulty. So this is what gives rise to the intrusive thoughts, the incorrect thoughts. So, for example, a patient may say, for example, I absolutely know that the FBI are coming after me because those traffic lights just turned red. And it's a classical mistake medical students will make when they first meet patients, when they do psychiatry. They will try to rationalise it. And there is no rationalising it, because the brain, the organ, has become unwell. And this is what you need to appreciate, is that your soul is occupying that organ. So it's not necessary. It's and this is why it's very.
In terms of therapy,
yes,
I think Imam Raza, you mentioned earlier on. In terms of the therapy, you always start off with a talking therapy, and the talking therapy is meant to provide that safety net, right, in your mind, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So this is what I'm saying. If you have tawakkul Allah, the safety net is the trust in Allah. Right, and that provides the comfort which stops you going in that direction.
But there are Muslim patients who don't have tawakkul upon Allah when they come to our sort of hospitals. In fact, even mentioning the word Allah causes them to become erratic and angry, and many other moods happen as well as a result of that. So we've got to be very careful in how we address Muslim patients in particular ways, because what you don't want to do is aggravate the condition that there is already. But look at, through talking therapy, what brings them to positivity, what brings them to negativity. I want to highlight and touch quickly upon the point what the brother, I don't know what the brother's name is, who mentioned about the brain, and Abu Bakr, okay. He's made a very important point, because if you look at the hadith about what the Prophet ﷺ said about the heart, that if it's correct and it's sound, then everything else is sound, and if it's not correct or sound, then nothing else is sound. That's a good example of the soul residing within the heart, and we have to not only look after the spiritual sort of health of the heart, we have to also look at the biological sort of health and the medical health of the heart as well. It's so important to look at everything as a whole rather than a separate entity.
Indeed. Okay. We've just got about 30 seconds or so left. Jazakallah, Imam Raza, for a fascinating discussion today. I really enjoyed it, inshallah. And I'm sure we'll pick up on this topic on months and I guess years to come. We do have a mental health awareness campaign on Inspire FM, inshallah. And when we have that, we'll surely get in touch with you, inshallah. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, listeners, that concludes our show for this Friday, inshallah.
Big thank you, everyone. Have a lovely weekend.
Indeed. And until next time, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We stream our daily broadcast on inspirefm.org. You'll find all our daily updates on our social media at Inspire FM Luton.